Mirror Force is one of the most recognizable battle traps of all time, and it consistently saw play at tournaments for over a decade. Today we're going to cover the history of this iconic trap card to find out how it evolved over the years. The original Mirror Force released all the way back in 2002's Metal Raiders. This is a normal trap card that says, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy all of your opponent's attack position monsters. Not only was Mirror Force a powerful threat on release, it also fundamentally changed how people played Yu-Gi-Oh! If you had enough attack points on board to win the game, but your opponent even had just one back row card, you always had to be aware that it might be Mirror Force. At that point, you can either hope they don't have it and go for game, or hedge your bets and switch a couple monsters to defense mode. Simply by existing, Mirror Force always had to be in the back of your mind as a player, otherwise you might lose all of your monster cards. While board wipes like Dark Hole and Regeki were popular in old school Yu-Gi-Oh!, Mirror Force and Torrential Tribute were unique for being able to board wipe on the opponent's turn. I do want to make sure that I mention that on the original North American print of this card, it also said that it negated the attack. Technically though, that's not how the card works, so that was corrected on all future prints. If Mirror Force destroys the attacking monster, of course the attack doesn't go through. However, if your opponent attacks with a monster that can't be destroyed by card effects, Mirror Force will not prevent the attack. It's just a small change, but it matters every once in a while. Because Mirror Force was so iconic, it got many retrains throughout the years. The first new Mirror Force card was Dark Mirror Force, released in Invasion of Chaos in March of 2004. You'll notice here as we go through these that they're often based on attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! And starting out with Dark makes sense for Invasion of Chaos. This is a battle trap that says, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, banish all defense position monsters your opponent controls. While this card doesn't look great at first glance, I will say conceptually I understand what they were going for here. Around this time, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had a lot more defense position monsters that people actually played. Things like Gravekeeper's Spy, Magician of Faith, and Morphine Jar would all be pretty good to hit with the Dark Mirror Force. However, it is an unusual effect to feature on a battle trap because most of those cards are designed to protect your monster that's being attacked. Compared to the original Mirror Force, which not only protects your monster by destroying the initial attacker, but also potentially takes out other monsters your opponent has that they were planning on attacking with, Dark Mirror Force doesn't look that great. It's even difficult justifying this card against flip effect monsters because Nobleman Across Out does its job a lot better. It's faster and it takes out additional copies in the deck. Not to mention that even if your opponent had a flip monster face down when you set the Dark Mirror Force, oftentimes they would flip it up in their main phase 1 where you couldn't Dark Mirror Force it anymore. Unless your opponent is playing Total Defense Shogun Turbo, Dark Mirror Force falls flat. A few years later, in 2007's Force of the Breaker, we got Radiant Mirror Force, a new normal trap that said, when an opponent's monster declares an attack while they control 3 or more attack position monsters, destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. From a modern perspective, this card looks pretty strange because it's a direct downgrade from the original Mirror Force, but remember, at this point, the original was still limited. If you were really optimistic back then, this card could have been considered your second, third, or fourth copy of the original Mirror Force. The issue here is that Radiant only works if your opponent has a big board, which means it's missing the versatility of the original. Using Mirror Force on 2 monsters is a really easy 1-for-2 trade that was especially valuable back in the day. But even if your opponent only had 1 monster, you could still use the Mirror Force like a Sakuratsu Armor. While Radiant Mirror Force can mimic the big board wipe aspect of the original, it can't really be used in a simplified game state. After that, we didn't see a new Mirror Force card for 8 years, and I think there's a pretty clear reason why. During that time period, Mirror Force was still seeing play at 1 copy per deck, format after format after format, so they had no reason to print better versions of it. But a big turning point was when it went to 3 copies per deck in 2014, and pretty much no one played it. Other than Winda, there weren't too many monsters that had destruction protection. It was more that if you Mirror Forced your opponent, they really wouldn't care. While you couldn't destroy Winda with Mirror Force, even if you were able to Mirror Force some other Shadal monsters, that would trigger their graveyard effects. It's a similar case with Burning Abyss, where once again, all of these cards have graveyard abilities that you wouldn't want to trigger with Mirror Force. Satellar Knights could use Deltaros to float into a monster from deck, which could basically keep up all of their advantage, and Clifford's could simply Pendulum Summon in main phase 2. Because people weren't willing to play Mirror Force when it was unlimited, that meant that they could finally start designing newer Mirror Force cards cards that had upgraded effects compared to the original. Before any new Battle Trap Mirror Force cards would appear though, we got Mirror Force Dragon in Dragons of Legend 2 in 2015. This card is summoned by using Mirror Force as material with the Fang of Krietas, and here's what it does. When a monster you control is targeted for an attack or by an opponent's card effect, you can destroy all cards your opponent controls. The effect on Mirror Force Dragon isn't necessarily bad. I do think it's a bit telegraphed in that your opponent can simply play around it by not using targeted abilities, but the main issue with this card, as with many anime cards, is the summoning condition. You wouldn't really want to put Mirror Force into your 2015 deck anyway, and you especially wouldn't want to put a card like the Fang of Krietas in there that only works when you drew the Mirror Force. Realistically, I don't think this card was ever meant to be competitively viable, but it did get us prepared for the Mirror Force battle traps that were just around the corner. Starting with Clash of Rebellions in August of 2015, we received a brand new Mirror Force card in 4 core sets in a row. Stormy Mirror Force was the first of these new cards, and it says, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, return all of your opponent's attack position monsters to the hand. It is one minor change from the original, but boy did it make a huge difference. The original Mirror Force really struggled against monsters that had graveyard effects, and Stormy Mirror Force is very clearly designed to avoid that issue. This card is particularly strong against extra deck monsters because if your opponent wants to resummon them again, they'll have to find a way to put materials on the board. On release, this card immediately saw play in a variety of trap decks like Burning Abyss, but I think it really found its home in Cosmos. Cosmos love OTKing, and by clearing your opponent's board, you can get in attacks with Cosmo Farm Girl to start off your combos. Stormy Mirror Force was a great way not only to buy you a turn, but also to clear the way for your big attacks. Stormy Mirror Force also paired quite well with the Paleozoic cards that released in late 2016. Just like with Cosmos, the Paleozoics didn't really have a great way of clearing the board, so Stormy Mirror Force was a huge help. Throughout 2017, Stormy Mirror Force continued to see play in Paleozoics, but it also popped up a lot of times in Zodiac decks. The Zodiac Mirror Match evolved a lot throughout 2017, but Stormy Mirror Force popped up over and over again as a really good non-targeting, non-destruction way to remove your opponent's monsters. Zodiacs commonly went for a big board of Xyz monsters, including cards like Gagaga Samurai to OTK, and Stormy Mirror Force wiped their entire field. Just between March and April of 2017, I was able to find over 100 instances of Stormy Mirror Force topping at competitive events. Stormy Mirror Force was an objectively powerful card at tournaments, and I think it was a great successor to the original Mirror Force. In November of 2015, we got Blazing Mirror Force, which combined the original effect of Mirror Force with Ring of Destruction. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy as many attack position monsters your opponent controls as possible, and if you do, take damage equal to half the combined original attack of those destroyed monsters, then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the damage you took. I wouldn't say this effect is bad, but it does still destroy monsters, so it doesn't really fix the main problem with the original. Regardless, the card did still see competitive play between 2017 and 2018, and it topped a handful of times. In 2017, a few Chainburn decks were able to use this card to some success, and in 2018, some Trickstar decks were able to use it as well. In burn decks specifically, this is a great way to deal a ton of unexpected damage to an opponent. It also popped up in a few Barrier Statue stun decks, not only to protect the statues, but to help you actually win the game. That deck exclusively played small monsters, so Blazing Mirror Force made a huge difference. Outside of those instances, it didn't really see a lot of play, which isn't too surprising considering it's not that different from the original. In 2016's Breakers of Shadow, we got Quaking Mirror Force, the first Mirror Force card to not have a removal effect. Here's what it does. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, change all of your opponent's attack position monsters to face down defense position. Monsters changed to face down defense position by this effect cannot change their battle positions. On release, Quaking Mirror Force was nowhere near as popular as Stormy Mirror Force, but it eventually found a home not only in the Paleozoic decks, but also in Zodiac decks, just like Stormy Mirror Force. These two cards saw a ton of play in 2016 and 2017, and often it was just up to personal preference which one people included in their decks. While Stormy Mirror Force can give you one extra turn to mount a comeback, Quaking Mirror Force locks down the entire board, potentially giving you multiple turns to try to draw into your combo. And while you still have to eventually deal with the monster cards that you Book of Moon, Quaking Mirror Force does prevent your opponent's monsters from going to the graveyard or back to the hand. Until you take the initiative to start dealing with the face downs, it's very difficult for your opponent to be able to interact with with them. Unfortunately, Quaking lost a lot of utility once they added link monsters into the game because those cannot be flipped face down. Just like with Storming, Quaking was an excellent upgrade compared to the original Mirror Force that was quite strong in a bunch of different formats for the first 2 years after being released. In May of 2016, they printed Drowning Mirror Force in Shining Victories, and it arguably has the most powerful Mirror Force effect. This card says, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, shuffle all of your opponent's attack position monsters into the deck. Drowning Mirror Force is kind of in its own category. It can't protect your monsters on the board because it requires your opponent to attack directly. There are a few cards that can attack directly even if the opponent controls monsters, so theoretically Drowning Mirror Force could hit those, but realistically you weren't really using this to protect your board. That being said, it's incredibly powerful and rare in Yu-Gi-Oh! To be able to shuffle back monsters into the deck even in modern times, so a lot of players did try to fit this into their decks. Throughout 2016, this card was incredibly popular in topping decks that played Card of Demise. Card of Demise restricts you from special summoning, so you usually wouldn't have a big board, making Drowning Mirror Force a great fit. Storming saw play in aggressive Cosmo decks, but Drowning saw play in control Cosmo decks. Demise Cosmo decks would load up their graveyard with Card of Demise and Cosmo Tin Can to revive these spaceships with things like Call of the Haunted and Oasis of Dragon Souls. Because you usually ended on Cosmo Tin Can and no other monsters, it made Drowning Mirror Force very easy to set up. And then in main phase 2, you could revive all of your spaceships to get a ton of advantage. Magispector Demise decks also played Drowning Mirror Force because the Magispector spell and traps required you to tribute your monsters, clearing up your field. Drowning Mirror Force saw play in Yosenju decks as well because all of your monsters bounced back to the hand in the end phase. Psyframes liked Drowning as well because all of their cards required them to control no monsters, which made Drowning Mirror Force very easy to activate. It's not surprising that Drowning Mirror Force didn't see as much play as Storming or Quaking because of that activation condition, but it still topped many events in a variety of strategies. A few years later, in July of 2018, we got Mirror Force Launcher, a continuous trap that searches Mirror Force. This card says, once per turn during your main phase, you can discard one monster, add one Mirror Force from your deck or graveyard to your hand. If this set card is destroyed by your opponent's card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can set this card from your graveyard and one Mirror Force from your hand, deck, or graveyard. They can be activated this turn. Even ignoring that Mirror Force cards had been power crept by 2018, I'm still extremely frustrated with almost every aspect of Mirror Force Launcher. For example, why can this card only search the original Mirror Force, which at this point had been power crept for over 4 years? Why can this card only be used during your main phase, not even the opponent's? Now you have to set the card on turn 1, not use it during your opponent's first turn, and then only be able to use it on your second turn. That is way too slow, especially by 2018 standards. Why does it require you to discard a monster instead of any card, considering that the decks that might play this card would probably be trap heavy? The graveyard effect is alright, I guess, but with battle traps, they're at their best when your opponent doesn't know you have them, so this makes it way too telegraphed. Finally, in April of 2024, so not too long ago, we got Mirage Mirror Force. This is a card that goes along with the new illusion type. Let's take a look at what it does. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, special summon one illusion monster from your hand or graveyard, and if you do, return the attacking monster to the hand. If a face-up illusion monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card, special summon one illusion monster from your hand or graveyard. You can only use this effect of Mirage Mirror Force once per turn. People aren't playing battle traps in 2024, and honestly, Mirage Mirror Force isn't even that good of a battle trap by other Mirror Force standards. Yeah, it can special summon a couple monsters, but the battle trap effect of this card is actually worse than Storming Mirror Force, which was printed many years earlier. Illusion type monsters are still fairly new to Yu-Gi-Oh, but even in the decks that are playing them, Mirage Mirror Force is nowhere to be found. Between 2015 and 2017, plenty of powerful Yu-Gi-Oh decks were released, yet these Mirror Force cards still saw competitive use. That being said, most of these Mirror Force retrains stopped seeing play by the end of 2017, and I think that there are a few reasons why that is. For most of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, cards have either been monster removal or back row removal. Of course, there have been exceptions, but especially up until 2017, that tended to be the case. Nowadays, though, plenty of cards deal with back row and monsters, and a lot of those cards are available in the extra deck whenever you need them. This does make it difficult for a Mirror Force card to even survive until the battle phase when you could use it. Furthermore, decks are so powerful these days that you really can't afford to wait until the battle phase to try and deal with their field. There aren't too many trap cards that are commonly played in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but the ones that do see play are really good interruptions that can prevent the opponent from comboing off. Just like they did 10 years ago, I think it would be interesting if they tried to once again modernize Mirror Force. A new Mirror Force card would probably require a Waking the Dragon effect on top of a really strong battle trap effect, but realistically, I'm not sure if they're going to do that. I am curious though, let me know the last time that you put a Mirror Force card into one of your decks. Honestly, I can't really remember the last time I did that outside of a sealed series, but I will say in a format like Master Saga, where you don't have access to as many powerful cards, that the Mirror Force battle traps have actually remained quite strong. Anyway, that's all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you later though. Goodbye.